Hi, everybody, and welcome back to season 3 of Cizzles. I can't believe it. We're already in season 3. I'd like to thank Brian Dean or congratulate Brian Dean for winning season 2 with his Mother of All Sauces. So congratulations to Brian. And here we go, season 3. So I'd like to introduce my guest chef today, Tara Mason. Tara, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. What cool opportunity. So I'm an assistant professor of inclusive education, and I also coordinate our special education program here at Western Colorado University. And I am just so excited to talk a little bit about our instructional techniques using Gumbo as my metaphor for
Oh, cool.
technology in our instruction.
Well, I know everybody loves a good gumbo. So where did you get your recipe? Is this something that you grew up with?
Yeah, so I'm from New Orleans originally, even though I live in this really cold place called Gunnison, Colorado. I think Gunnison's considered one of the coldest places in the United States. But I have no skills here other than what people tell me to do with this cold weather. But being from New Orleans, my gumbo recipe is really just done by smell and been passed down from generations of women in my family. And so I have that recipe to share with each of you and talk a little about how I make my gumbo.
And then what is the technology that you're going to be talking along with your gumbo?
So I think that it's really important for us to think about how we are going to explicitly teach technology tools, and then we need to do some parallel use of them together, and then we need to progress monitor them. So it's kind of tool ubiquitous. So using speech to text, text to speech, using an iPad, using a Chromebook, just using technology tools where we're thinking about learner variability and we're proactively using them, using like universal design for learning as our framework. And then we need to be checking back and making sure that students understand how to use them. So that's what we'll talk about today.
All right, great. So we actually have a series of videos that you've prepared. So we're going to start with the first video, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about how that relates to your technology. So let's get started with the first video.
Okay.
So ingredients are like our learners. Let's make sure we've accounted for everyone and anything unique about or special about them that we want to be thinking about as we cook our gumbo. A great way to think about this is how spicy we want our gumbo. I like a spicy gumbo, but my own kids do not. So I will pit my jalapenos here to be sensitive to their willingness to have a little spice in the mix, but not too much. Another thing to think about is the usual ingredients. And the things that we put in gumbo, like we put peppers, celery, onions. These are the usual things that we know make a good gumbo. And I would compare that to just good teaching. So what are the usual things that we should put in place that we know are really important for good teaching?
Okay, excellent. So yeah, exactly. We really need to start with at a place where there's good teaching, and that's going to begin our framework and what we're thinking about. And that is using all of those tools that we have that we've used all along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that having things, having supports ready to go and being really proactive about putting supports in place. And so I think that what happens so oftentimes in special education is we're very reactive. And I've
Right.
heard people talk about, a lot of what their work feels like. It's like they're running a triage, kind of like
Right.
emergency unit. And that's not what we want. We really instead want to be really proactive, planning for students to use a whole bunch of technology tools. Why not?
Mhm.
There really isn't a good reason not to use text to speech, for instance. And so, if we proactively plan for that, then we'll have that kind of good stuff in place, and our students then are able to be multimodal learners. And research really supports that that's what students want. They want to have a lot of tools that they can use, and so they can be very strategic in their learning. And it's our job to proactively put those kind of things in place for them.
Right. And we don't know which student is going to need which tool on any given day. So I think that it's important to make sure that they're available for all students. You know, a student that, might come in with a cold one day may need some extra support somewhere where they didn't need it the day before. So I think that you're right. That's really important. All right, let's get to the next video and see where we're going with this gumbo.
All right, let's do it.
All right, everyone. So let's go back to our usual ingredients. So as you can see here, I've got my vegetables chopped up, I've got my sausage chopped up, and I have my onions. I even have a candle on, which helps with all the tears when cutting onions. So let's talk about these usual ingredients. I want you to think of good teaching like we might think of a base for any great soup. In Cajun cooking, we call this base the Holy Trinity of Cajun cooking. So this is what my mom told me. In this base of Holy Trinity, we have green onions, celery, bell peppers, we have onions, and I also put a little bit of jalapenos, again, taking those pits out. And so in this base, we're creating a melody of flavors that will taste good with any other flavor combination we're adding to our soup. The gumbo we're making today is sausage and chicken. This is like good instruction. A proactive base for good instruction is where we know we have allowed for student voice and choice in our learning environments. That's how we can be proactive and make sure that students have as much as they need before we have to implement some accommodations to help with unique individualized needs they might have. This can be accomplished using universal design for learning. So let's dig in a little bit more. So this Holy Trinity, green onions and gumbo, this is our planning. This is us having the right materials and options for our students. And so let's think of it like this. The bell peppers right here are like learner engagement. They're spicy. We want to have multiple ways our students can engage in our lesson, and we kind of want it to be a little shocking to their system, right? A little spicy. So we want to plan for that. Our onions right here are like our emotional connections. And again, tied to universal design for learning, we know that we have to make emotional connections in our brain in order to stick new learning to things that we already knew about or other background knowledge we might have. So I'm always crying when I cut onions, and our students also need to feel identity and belonging and connections in their lesson. Universal design for learning calls for us to think about our learners in this emotional way, both in their emotional connection to our lesson and also an emotional connection to the learning objectives. Next, right here, we have celery. It's like a crunchy but somewhat kind of tasteless component of our Holy Trinity. It is essential to our soup though because it adds texture and flavor. It kind of is like creates body in our soup. It also cuts away any other flavors that might be too much, and so it's kind of neutralizing those flavors. So lots of ways to apply that to our metaphor of universal design for learning. Other ingredients to get ready ahead of time, we have our meats right here. We have chicken boiling, which this is a proactive thing for us to do. Not only do we cook our chicken, getting it ready to go in our gumbo, but we also use that soup broth as the base for our gumbo. All right, so these are all important for us to have ready ahead of time. And it can be linked to our thinking related to lesson plans, materials, having the right materials for students, having multiple bowls ready that we can add our mix into so we're ready to go in a flash once we get our roux going. All right.
Okay, there are so many things that I want to comment on there because first of all, I didn't know that lighting a candle would help with the tears of cutting onions. I have terrible time cutting onions with tears, so that'll be my next thing. But I also was thinking how you're right that the onions make things so emotional, and we learn through emotions, and that is so important. But even with our teachers, when you have the candle burning, like you have to take into account reducing the amount of stress that the teachers are under. And isn't that what we're doing by doing this proactive planning, is reducing the amount of stress that comes later or comes when you have to be in a reactive space?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and I think that, thinking, I mean, like, kind of like, putting your own oxygen mask on first so you can then help the next person on the airplane. I think that teachers, I know for myself, I have to be very planned, and otherwise I might just feel, a little bit scattered, a little frazzled. And that's again, that good teaching, like put those
Right.
good teaching in place, and don't, and know that if you haven't put some good plans in place, you are going to be a little frazzled. You're going to be able to do a very good job accommodating students. And we know we're going to have a whole bunch of unique needs in our classrooms, right? I never, ever had the same student ever, right? All different students, all different
Right.
needs.
Right.
Um,
Each one is an individual and is going to come to, and it might not be the same thing that they need every day. Different
mhm.
students are going to need different things on different days. So to be prepared for that, I think is great. And I love that the spiciness that you are adding to it. And it's true. Sometimes you have to adjust that spiciness depending on the student. Some students may not like to have all of the really big interactive activities where other students they love it. So being able to have that multimodal engagement is so important. And relating that to the Gumbo, I thought you did an excellent job.
Well, thank you. And I mean, and the thing is, I think a lot of times, especially when we're working with students who need some extra support. So like we find in our special education classrooms, and a lot of times you'll say, you'll say to a student like, oh, we just have to get through this. I'm like, why would you approach it that way? Who wants to get on that bus? Who's excited
Right.
about that activity? And so that's also where the spicy part comes in. Like engagement is a huge factor in learning. If your students aren't engaged, they are not learning. And,
Right.
and if you're not if you're not bringing some enthusiasm to the mix, like if you're not like, hey, this is going to be cool, doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're having a big party and not learning, because we know that learning's not always a huge party. But it does mean that you've got to be pretty enthusiastic to get students to come on board with you.
Yeah.
So to me, that's that spicy piece that's really important. And the emotional piece, I think, is huge, because
Yes.
if you cannot, if we don't make an emotional connection with something, and that means that like I can have a memory about it, I can have some background knowledge about it, I've got to have something to stick that learning to, so I can then start learning about it. And so I think a great example for this is like, if someone talks to me about teaching, I can play. I know a lot about teaching. I'm so excited. I've got tons of background knowledge. Say someone tries to explain to me how a car engine works. I am just like, oh man, I've got nothing. Like, I'm not excited. I'm not motivated. I just, honestly, I don't want to even know. I just don't even want to know. I just want the mechanic to fix my car engine, because I just don't have any space to try to imagine how a car engine works. It just is so foreign to me, and I just don't have any background knowledge about it other than what I know when it breaks. So,
Right. But
yeah.
and that's the thing. It doesn't even matter what you're teaching. If you can make those connections to something that the student is interested in, which you can do, it gets them excited, because, maybe you're not interested in car engines, but if you had a student that was interested in car engines, I'm sure you could connect their interest to whatever it was that you were gonna teach. Or we could do that even for you, and maybe get you to learn how to fix your own car.
I know. Well,
But
it's true. It's true though. I do. I mean, like, I can absolutely get on board with talking about car engines. I had a student who was super excited about fast engines, and I
yep.
was like, tell me more. Because I love teaching. Like, I
Yeah.
love working with that student. I love making an emotional connection with that student. So if they're pumped about car engines, then yeah, I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, let's go on to the next video, on video
Okay.
3.
Everyone. So our next step is making our roux. And so our roux is like bringing the team together. And this is a way for us to think about planning for learner variability. And so we already have all of our vegetables chopped. We already have everything kind of ready ahead of time. So we have all of our best intentions for students to have access and to be successful. We already have that in place, right? So we're ready to go with our universally designed lesson. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to start watching our learners. And it's kind of like watching our roux. We're going to start thinking about, how do they learn best? What kind of things do they need? I'm going to be checking for progress monitoring care. This is going to be me thinking about, how do I watch learning as it's happening so I can be prepared for what kind of things the student might need. It's very similar to making a roux. Making a roux is something that is very time consuming. In Cajun cooking, we will sit here and stir our roux for 10-15 minutes probably, and you want to watch it. You want to wait for it to turn the right color brown. Right now, we're just getting started. Our roux is composed of 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of olive oil. We have it on high heat, and we will stir just like this, again, for 10-15 minutes. It's really hard to say. It really depends on how much heat is coming to the bowl, even what kind of bowl you're using. And that's so much like learners, right? Learners are so variable, and we're constantly watching them because they're all so unique, and they're all so different in how they learn. We know that no average brain exists, right? Everyone has their own strengths and talents. And we really need to identify what those are as we watch student learning. And so let's make our roux.
All right. So first, I have to comment that your apron is amazing.
Oh, my CIDDL apron?
It just happens to have the Cizzles apron on, which I was so grateful for, but it looks amazing. And thank you for wearing it.
Of course.
And they are available for any of our chefs that in the future. If you'd like to be a chef, we promise that you will get your own Cizzles apron. They're hot commodities right now. So anyway, so you were talking about the making the roux. So how does that relate to what your topic is?
Well, so you have to kind of be willing to be in the process. I think sometimes we're always in such a big hurry. We always, it's like we do some teaching and then we're like, okay, great. So you're ready to go. Okay, great. I'm going to go deal with these 500 other things that I've decided I have to go do right now. And making a roux is a great metaphor for that because you really can't rush it. You just can't. And you really do need to watch it. And you just really need to kind of be open to just being there and not being distracted. Just be in that moment. And I think we have to do that with students. Learner variability is the rule, not the exception. And in order to learn about how your students learn best, in order to kind of figure out their access points, to figure out what's going to work for them, especially with their technology tools, and really see kind of where the roadblocks are, like doing like a task analysis, for instance. Like, where did this kind of break down? You're using text to speech, but all of a sudden you're not paying attention anymore. Is that because you didn't stop and start and think about what you're reading, whatever? It's the same as making a roux. Be in that moment. Don't get distracted. You have to kind of stir it continuously, because if you don't, it'll burn. But not in the way we want. It is burning. That's what we want for roux, but it'll burn in the way that you don't want, which is like not that
fire.
Slow.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that's such a really good point for our pre-service teachers too, is to be able to make sure that we're teaching our pre-service teachers what that looks like, what it looks like to slow down and to really evaluate, what you're trying to convey. So, all right, let's go on to the next video.
Okay.
Okay, so it's time for us to start adding our spice blend. Another aspect of thinking about our unique learners and adjusting as needed is when we think about our spices to our roux. This is a great moment to add a little something for my students who I know need extra support. This is my monitor, and then I adjust and I monitor some more. My spice blend is both my tried and true, using my background in teaching, making gumbo for I've made gumbo for the past 25 years. I know what I like to use, and I'm not afraid to try new things. I'm not afraid to experiment. I know some of the usual ingredients that I want, but then I can also innovate. Gumbo is all of the senses. How does it smell? Does the roux look right? Adding extra meats or ingredients that I have on hand that will complement the flavors. Don't be afraid to try new things, since they can make a difference for your students. Like we've been talking about, I'm watching my gumbo very carefully right now. And as you will probably notice, the color is starting to change, but it's not quite there yet. And so I'm going to use those great best practices. I'm going to keep monitoring and thinking about how my students are learning, but I'm going to keep watching and making sure that they're ready maybe for the next step. Maybe they're ready to learn a new concept. I'm going to keep kind of doing some visual assessment, just like I'm doing with my roux here. What spices did I add in? I added in some sea salt. I added in some Cajun spices. I will add some more of those in to taste as I get ready, and then I'm going to add some fresh peppercorns. We're almost there, but not quite yet. Remember what we talked about. You don't want to rush it. Stop.
Okay, first of all, that pepper mill is amazing. I've never seen one like that. So that looks like a lot of fun. I could play with that for a while. And I loved your comment, though, about being innovative with your recipes and with your classrooms, because so many times I've seen teachers, they get stuck in ruts and they've been teaching for 15, 20, 25 years, and they're not willing to try new things. And I think that that's a disservice for their students, that you need to be able to innovate even when you've been doing things for a long time.
Oh, I so agree. And I think that that's particularly true when it comes to technology. I think that we are so hesitant to put technology tools in. And I get this all the time. People will say, oh, well, you're just so techie. And I appreciate it. Like, they probably think I'm a lot younger than I am. So I'm like, oh, I'll take that. Thank you. But the truth of the matter is that I just like it. I just like it. I'm not any more techie than anyone else. I just kind of enjoy gadgets. I mean, I grew up kind of watching Star Wars and Star Trek, and I just love like all that really fun stuff like smartwatches and Alexas and, artificial intelligence. I think that stuff is really cool. But one of the things I was thinking about as I was watching that I think is also really key is that don't be afraid to be your own personality. Like, as I'm throwing spices into my gumbo, I know that that's probably stressing my husband out because he wants to measure everything. He uses a recipe. He just wants to see the recipe. That's it. And if we don't have an ingredient in the house, he completely loses it. And he's like, oh, I have to go to the store. I've got to go buy this. And I'm like, why can't you just use something else? And he's like, no, it's what the recipe calls for. I don't cook like that. I am all about smell. I'm all about just add some more spices in. Like, as I'm talking, I'm just like adding more in. And it's kind of like that with teaching too. Like, don't be afraid to show students your personality. They want to know you. And they
Right.
will, and that emotional connection, they'll make that emotional connection with you.
Right.
They'll get excited about learning with you, and they'll learn
Right.
anything with you.
And that's key too. I think when we're trying to introduce a new technology or a novel technology and you've never used it before, get the kids involved.
Totally.
Get them involved and learn along with them, and let them know I'm not sure how to use this technology, but we're going to learn about it together. And isn't that going to be more meaningful to them for both of you overall? So not to be afraid. Not to be afraid to show your students that you can learn and sometimes fail and sometimes you pick up and move on. Isn't that the best lesson that we can teach?
Oh, totally. It's 100% aligned with both UDL and with growth mindset. And what I call that is parallel technology use. I love seeing parallel technology use. I love it when we are using text-to-speech to listen to a news article, and I'm actually playing that news article using text-to-speech for my classroom. I'm stopping and starting it. I'm checking for reading comprehension. I'm using a lot of metacognitive, like teacher talk. I'm letting them know, like, oh gosh, now what was that they said? That's a really great piece of evidence. I think I'm going to highlight that so I can use that in my writing later. I'm doing a lot of that modeling for them, and we're doing parallel technology use. So they see me using my technology tools and we're learning together.
All right, well, let's see where our gumbo is now.
Okay.
So once your roux has turned the right dark brown, you are ready to add the ingredients you prepped ahead of time. This part of the process moves super fast. I think of a great way to compare this is to learning our programs is when students are taking off for independent practice. We've been thinking and watching them so carefully, monitoring their progress while we are all learning together. But we sometimes we forget to check back once we have set them off to work. And that's kind of what happens here. All of a sudden it's moving very, very fast, because all of a sudden, if you're anything like I was in middle school, at the middle school level, you are flooded with questions as the students are getting to work, and you kind of didn't plan ahead for that independent part. And it's like they're all like getting ready to add vegetables all at the same time. And then you can't get to everyone fast enough, and then we lose students at that moment. So make a plan for this. It is so easy in our cooking, if we planned well, to know that it'll all go as we want. Whereas with students, this part is so messy. So I recommend having a checklist or some sort of tech flow for independent work, so students know what kind of things they can do and how you can then move around and get to their questions while they are still able to work. Some other suggestions, having students pre-select small groups, determining on the level of need they might have. Again, like having students kind of do a reflection of, do I need a little bit more support, or am I ready to take off? Or what about using some of our great adult learning strategies, such as having a parking lot for questions, where we have students do a turn and talk with a partner to make sure that they understand the instructions that what they need to do for their independent practice. Or maybe they have a Post-it note or some sort of self-reflection so they can add questions about what they think they need to do next. All right, so here we go. So with gumbo, this part, like I said, can move very fast. Once our roux is that right color brown, we add our Holy Trinity for Cajun cooking into our roux, and we kind of give that a quick moment to kind of fry and get into the roux, and it adds a whole bunch of flavor, because the next step that we'll do is we'll add in the rest of our meat ingredients and then our broth.
Okay, so first of all, that looks amazing. I'm really starting to get hungry now. But the comments that you were making about, that is what happens. Students are starting to take off, and to be able to have that plan in place for when that occurs, so that everything doesn't break down, is really a great idea. And there's so many things now with technology that we can use to implement that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really all those executive functioning skills that we forget about. We have our students who need our support, and we're like, okay, great. I'm going to put this great support in place for you. I'm going to teach you really quick how to use it. Maybe we do some parallel technology use. Okay, we're going to do all that good stuff. We know that's good instruction. Then we give ourselves a pat on the back, and we're like, great. Now I'm going to go do those other 500 things I want to go do. And the student has questions, and they don't know what to do next. And so I really love checklists. I've used checklists where I have like a picture icon of the technology tool the student is using, and I'll have things like, when I read, I use this. The next, I do this. I use this pause button to check for understanding, those kind of things, because I know that my students need a little bit more of a checklist of some sort of organizational strategy for that independent work. I know that they might still need a little bit more support. Or another issue that happens is that we put things in place and then we don't check back. So this happens all the time. As an assistive technology specialist, I can tell you that supports what we put in place, best intentions. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'll check back with you in May. Have a great year. And it's like, no. Nope, we want to be progress monitoring. We want to be making sure that technology is working. I remember having a student in a school district I worked in, and the student tells me after I go and check in with them, they're like, I don't know, the device, my iPad just stopped working and just turned black and just wasn't working. And I'm trying to figure out what the problem was. We're trying to kind of sleuth it together. And I was like, well, I mean, did you, can you turn it on? And they were like, I was like, did you charge it? And they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, okay, yeah, you need to charge the device. So
we all run out of energy after work.
Yeah, pretty simple fix. Oh, I lost you for a second.
Oh, sorry. Okay, here we go. Let's try again.
Let's do this. So it's time to add all of our ingredients together and stir, knowing that all of our planning is now going to come together and we're going to make a great gumbo. So I've got chicken and sausage here that I'm going to stir up together. All right. And the next ingredient that's really key here, since it is a soup, is to add in some broth. You'll notice with gumbo that as it comes together, it'll turn that nice dark brown, and you're going to want to cook this for an hour to a couple of hours. What I really like to do is have this ready ahead of time and let it simmer and cook for a while. The other thing that I always have ready ahead of time is some steamed rice. We use a rice cooker at my house. And then to serve, I would give it a taste, make sure that my spice concoction is enough in there, and then I would serve it in a bowl over white rice. Thank you.
I really felt like by watching that I could smell how delicious that was as you were cooking. Your house must have smelled so good.
So good. It's nice and warm. Soups are great. Soups are such a great thing to have. Kind of warms up a house.
And this was a great presentation. I love the talking. This topic is no mumbo gumbo. It's very important that all of us really take the time to be able to evaluate some of the programs that we're using and the technology that we're using, and think about our students and using that UDL framework every chance that we can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that planning is so key, because if we're planning for diversity, planning for variability, then we have all the best ingredients already in place for students to be successful. And then it's so much easier for us to then reactively go during the learning and put some other supports in place. It's also really great because it doesn't single out our students. You know, it doesn't make anyone feel like they're being singled out. We're all using technology tools. You know, why not have universal use of text-to-speech? Why not? I just think that it's such a win-win for all students. And then there are some students who are going to need, even some more enhanced support with their text-to-speech, but then they don't feel singled out because we're all using it.
Right, right. That's so important. So I loved our conversation today, and thank you so much for joining us. If you want more information about Tara's recipe for gumbo or talking about the technology, please head over to CIDDL.com. Again, this is the beginning of season 3. So if you'd like to be a guest chef, please contact us at CIDDL.org. And thank you so much for joining us today in the kitchen.
Thank you.